They laughed at her badge before they ever learned her name. It wasn't loud laughter, just the kind that stings more. Side glances, smirks over coffee cups, a quiet joke whispered behind a gloved hand as the ER lights hummed overhead. The new nurse stood at the edge of the trauma bay posture, steady eyes focused, wearing a plain uniform and a badge that didn't look impressive enough to matter. No one noticed how she memorized every alarm tone. No one saw how her fingers never shook. No one asked why that badge looked worn in a way time alone couldn't explain. Then the sound came, not applause, not shouting. A low, thunderous chop of air that rattled the windows and silenced the room. The intercom crackled. Radios lit up, and over an open channel a calm, urgent voice cut through the chaos with one question that froze everyone in place. Riverside Mercy. Where is she? And suddenly no one was laughing anymore. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you're drawn to stories where silence, pressure, and truth collide, subscribe and stay with us. Riverside Mercy Medical Center didn't believe in first impressions. It believed in hierarchy. In the ER, respect was measured by how long you'd survived the chaos, how many night shifts you'd swallowed whole, how many screaming families you'd learned to tune out, how efficiently you could move through blood and noise without letting it touch your face. New people were expected to earn their invisibility before they earned a voice. Emily Carter understood that within her first hour, she had arrived early 20 minutes before her shift, standing alone beneath the fluorescent lights of the locker room while the building woke around her. She changed quietly, folding her civilian clothes with deliberate care, as if precision itself were a habit she could not shed. Her badge, white plastic black, lettering a small silver pin fixed near the clip, went on last. Emily adjusted it once. Then she left it alone. Out on the ER floor, the morning surge had already begun. Gurneys rolled in like waves. Monitors chirped and complained. A man shouted in pain down the hall, while a toddler cried somewhere behind a curtain. Emily took it all in without flinching. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, equipment, people. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. Charge. Nurse Melissa Grant noticed her immediately. Melissa had been at Riverside Mercy for 11 years, long enough to know where power lived. She wore confidence like armor chin, high voice, sharp ponytail pulled tight enough to look like it hurt. When she spotted Emily standing near the supply station, she slowed, scanning her from shoes to badge. New Melissa said not as a question. "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied. Melissa's gaze lingered on the badge, on the pin. Her mouth twitched. "You're early," Melissa said. "Good. You can start by restocking Bay 4. We had a mess overnight." Emily nodded. "Of course." No pushback, no hesitation. As Emily moved off, Melissa turned to the two nurses beside her, lowering her voice just enough to be heard. "Did you see that thing on her badge?" one of them whispered. "Looks like she made it herself," the other replied, stifling a laugh. Emily heard them. She always heard things like that. She didn't react. Bay 4 was quiet when she entered, too quiet. The patient had been transferred to ICU hours earlier, but the aftermath remained discarded, packaging a smear of dried blood on the rail, an IV pole left crooked and forgotten. Emily cleaned with methodical efficiency, checking expiration dates, aligning supplies so labels faced outward. When she finished, the bay looked ready for war. Minutes later, a paramedic burst through the doors, pushing a gurney at full speed. 58-year-old male, chest pain, hypotensive, he shouted. Melissa barked orders. Nurses scrambled. Emily stepped in without being asked, snapping gloves on, already positioning the crash cart closer. As the paramedic rattled off vitals, Emily caught something no one else did: the medication bag hanging from the IV pole. "That dosage is too high for his weight," she said calmly. The room stilled for half a beat. Melissa turned sharply. "Excuse me." Emily met her eyes, respectful but unyielding. "He's under 180. That dose could drop his pressure further." The attending physician glanced at the chart, then the bag. A quick recalculation. "She's right," he said. "Adjust it." Melissa's jaw tightened. No one thanked Emily. No one apologized. But when the gurney rolled out, stabilized minutes later, one of the paramedics gave Emily a brief nod. Professional, quiet, meaningful. Emily returned to her assigned tasks, invisible again. By mid-morning, the ER was humming at a dangerous pitch. Word spread of a multi-car accident on the interstate fog, speeding a chain reaction that had shut down 2 lanes. EMS calls stacked up. Melissa took control with clipped efficiency, assigning stations, deciding who handled what. Emily was not assigned to triage. Instead, she was sent for linens, then labs, then to watch a stable patient who didn't need watching. It was deliberate. Emily recognized the tactic. Keep her busy, keep her quiet, keep her out of the center. She complied without complaint. But inside, something tightened. This hospital wasn't random. She had chosen it. Riverside Mercy sat less than 10 miles from a stretch of highway she knew too well, a place that still surfaced in her dreams when the world went quiet. She hadn't come here to be comfortable. She had come because this place mattered. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it right away. Not until she was alone near the medication room, the door half closed behind her. One message. No name attached. Stand by. If it happens, don't hesitate. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she locked the phone and slipped it away. Out on the floor, doctor. Ryan Hale moved between beds with practiced calm. He was in his late 30s, sharp-eyed, respected but careful. He noticed patterns. Noticed how Emily seemed to be everywhere without ever being assigned anywhere important. Noticed how she spoke only when necessary, and when she did, she was precise. He filed the observation away. Late afternoon bled into evening. The sky outside the ambulance bay, windows darkened, clouds stacking low and heavy. Thunder rolled in the distance. Then, faintly beneath the noise of the ER, something else vibrated through the walls. A sound most people didn't notice at first. Emily did. Her head tilted slightly, eyes lifting toward the ceiling. Far away. Rotors. Too distant to be certain. Too early to matter. For now. The night shift arrived like a held breath finally released. Riverside Mercy's ER transformed after sunset, not quieter but sharper. Voices dropped an octave. Movements became faster, leaner. The fluorescent lights felt harsher against tired eyes, and every beep from a monitor seemed louder than it should have been. Emily Carter adjusted to the change without comment. By 7:40 p.m., the call everyone had been waiting for finally came through the interstate. Pileup was worse than first reported. Fog had thickened into a wall. At least 8 vehicles. Unknown number of injured. EMS units were stretched thin across 3 counties. Melissa Grant clapped her hands once hard. "Listen up," she snapped. "Triage in 2-minute rotations. Trauma bays, 1 through 3 prepped. I want no freelancing, no surprises." Her eyes slid briefly, deliberately past Emily. Emily was handed a clipboard and told to handle supply coordination. Again, she accepted it, taking the clipboard with both hands, as if it were something fragile. Inside, frustration pressed against her ribs, sharp and unwelcome. This wasn't ego. This was timing. She could feel the night tightening, the way a storm gathers itself before breaking. She moved anyway. As stretchers began pouring in, Emily stayed in motion, anticipating needs before they were voiced. She staged blood coolers near the bays without being asked. She checked airway carts twice. She repositioned an oxygen tank just as a trauma team burst through the doors, saving seconds no one consciously registered, but everyone benefited from. Melissa noticed. She said nothing. In Trauma Bay 2, a middle-aged woman screamed for her husband, blood matting her hair. A junior nurse froze eyes wide. Emily stepped in beside her, voice low and steady, guiding her hands, grounding her in simple actions. The woman survived the initial assessment because no one panicked. Still, Emily's name was not called. The laughter came again during a brief lull. 2 nurses leaned against the counter near the nurses' station, exhaustion loosening their tongues. "I swear," one said, nodding toward Emily, "that badge looks like she stole it from a costume store." "Yeah," the other replied. "What is that pin supposed to be? Secret agent nurse," they snorted. Emily was 3 feet away logging supplies. She didn't turn around. Her shoulders stayed relaxed, but her jaw tightened just enough to ache. She had worn uniforms before. She had learned early what it meant to be underestimated. This was familiar territory. Still, it hurt. "Doctor." Hale watched the exchange from across the room. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. The ER was on the brink of overload. Picking a fight with senior staff now would fracture the team. He told himself he'd address it later. Later came faster than expected. A new ambulance screamed into the bay, lights flashing erratically. Paramedics burst through the doors, shouting over each other. Unidentified male, severe blunt force trauma, pressure dropping. As they rolled past, one of the paramedics leaned close to Dr. Hale. County dispatch picked up something weird, he muttered. Military frequency. Brief. Didn't get details. Dr. Hale frowned. Military. The paramedic shrugged. That's what it sounded like. Not medevac yet, but close. Emily heard that too. Her grip tightened on the clipboard. Military traffic didn't wander onto civilian channels by accident, and when it did, it usually meant something had already gone very wrong. Overhead, the intercom crackled. All available staff, the voice announced, strained but controlled. Prepare for potential surge. Security increase presence near roof access. Heads turned. Melissa straightened. Roof access, she repeated. Why would... The announcement cut off. A ripple of unease moved through the ER. Emily glanced instinctively toward the ceiling again. She felt it now, not sound, not yet, but pressure. Like a storm cell shifting direction. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. She didn't look at it. Instead, she moved toward Trauma Bay, one where a patient's vitals were slipping. As she stepped in, she noticed something small but telling, a doctor staring at her badge. Not mocking, studying. The man was older, grey-haired, his hands steady as he adjusted an IV line. His gaze lingered on the silver pin, his brow furrowing as if he were chasing a half-remembered thought. Then the moment passed. Outside, thunder cracked closer, now rattling the ambulance bay doors. Inside, Administrator Charles Whitmore appeared near the nurses' station, immaculate suit starkly out of place amid the blood and chaos. He spoke urgently to Melissa, gesturing toward the elevators. What's going on? He demanded. I'm hearing rumors. Melissa shook her head. Nothing confirmed. Probably nothing. Whitmore didn't look convinced. Emily passed them, pushing a supply cart. Whitmore's eyes flicked to her badge, then away, dismissive. He had bigger things to worry about. The next call came 10 minutes later. Not over the intercom, over the radio. It cut through the ER on an open channel, clear-clipped, unmistakably controlled. Riverside Mercy, the voice said. This is inbound unit. Confirm availability. Every conversation died. Melissa reached for a handset. This is charge, Nurse Grant. Identify your unit. A pause. Short. Heavy. Inbound rotary wing, the voice replied. We are requesting direct coordination. Whitmore's face drained of color. Melissa swallowed. For what purpose? Another pause. Then we are seeking a specific individual. Emily felt it then. Not fear. Recognition. Her breath slowed. Her mind sharpened. Around her staff exchanged confused glances. A doctor, Melissa asked, trying to sound in control. Negative. A surgeon. Negative. The radio crackled softly, the background hum of engines bleeding through. We were informed she is currently on your floor, the voice continued. Please advise. Silence swallowed the ER. Melissa's gaze swept the room, searching faces. Emily stood very still. No one noticed her except Dr. Hale. He watched her posture shift by a fraction, watched the way she squared her shoulders without lifting her chin as if preparing for impact. He watched her eyes, not wide, not startled, but alert, ready. Melissa pressed the handset closer to her mouth. You'll need to be more specific. The reply came immediately this time. Riverside Mercy, the voice said, calm but edged now with urgency. Where is she? The question hung in the air like a held breath. And for the first time since she'd walked through the doors that morning, Emily Carter felt every eye in the room begin slowly to turn. For half a second, no one moved. The ER, normally a living organism of motion and noise, fell into an unnatural stillness, like a room holding its breath before bad news landed. The radio hissed, softly waiting. Monitors continued their indifferent beeping. Somewhere behind a curtain, a patient coughed. Melissa Grant straightened, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. I don't know who you think you're calling for, she said into the handset, but we don't. The radio cut her off. Negative, the voice replied, firmer now. We have confirmation. She clocked in at 0600 hours. We are not mistaken. Whitmore took a step forward, his polished shoes squeaking faintly against the floor. This is Administrator Whitmore, he said quickly. If you're requesting hospital personnel, you'll need to go through proper channels. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the reply came back colder. With respect, sir, channels have already been cleared. Whitmore's mouth opened, closed. Doctor. Hale felt something settle in his gut, a sensation he'd learned to trust over years in emergency medicine. Whatever this was, it wasn't routine. And it wasn't going away. Melissa lowered the radio slowly, eyes scanning the staff. Her gaze landed on Emily again, lingering just a second too long. Emily stood near the medication station, hands resting lightly on the counter. Her expression hadn't changed, but internally everything had. She knew the cadence of that voice, the way it spoke without wasted syllables. The way it assumed cooperation not because it demanded it, but because it was used to being obeyed. This was earlier than expected. She had hoped naively that if it happened at all, it would be quiet. "Emily," Melissa said sharply, "why don't you step back to Bay 5 and stay there?" It wasn't a request. Emily met her eyes. "We're short in Bay 1. The patient's pressure is unstable." "I didn't ask for your assessment," Melissa snapped. "I gave you an instruction." A familiar tension coiled in Emily's chest. She felt the old reflex rise, follow the chain, avoid escalation. It had kept her alive more than once. But this time it wasn't just about her. She glanced toward Bay 1, where a trauma patient lay pale and motionless, a resident fumbling with tubing. Seconds mattered. "I can help stabilize him first," Emily said evenly. "Then I'll move." Melissa's face flushed. "Do you think you're in charge here?" Before Emily could answer, Dr. Hale stepped in. "She's right," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Give her 2 minutes." Melissa stared at him, stunned. Then she nodded stiffly. "Fine, 2 minutes." Emily was already moving. Inside Bay 1, chaos edged toward panic. The resident's hands shook as he tried to establish access. Emily slid in beside him, voice calm, anchoring. "Angle's off," she murmured. "Here, feel the vein." The line went in clean. The patient's vitals steadied just enough. Outside the bay, the radio crackled again. "Inbound unit is 2 minutes out," the voice announced. "Requesting helipad clearance and internal escort." Whitmore swallowed hard. "Helipad," he echoed. "We're not a military facility." "You are tonight," came the reply. Security officers began moving, uncertain but alert. Overhead, the low thump Emily had sensed earlier finally made itself known, distant, rhythmic, unmistakable. A helicopter. The sound threaded through the building's bones, vibrating glass and steel alike. Staff drifted toward the windows despite themselves. Phones came out quickly, shoved away again. No one wanted to be caught recording. Melissa rounded on Emily as she exited Bay 1. "You," she hissed. "What is this?" Emily wiped her hands, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I don't know." It wasn't entirely true, but it was all she was willing to give. The helicopter grew louder by the second, the rotors chopping the air with disciplined aggression. Wind rattled the ambulance bay doors. Ceiling lights flickered. Overhead, the intercom chimed again. "All non-essential personnel clear the roof immediately." The words essential and non-essential landed like a judgment. Whitmore's phone buzzed. He answered it with shaking fingers, his expression darkening with every passing second. When he hung up, his face was ashen. "They're already on approach," he said quietly. "We can't stop this." Melissa's jaw worked as she processed that. Her authority, so carefully curated, was slipping through her fingers. Her eyes snapped back to Emily. "You," she said again, louder, now drawing attention. "You know something. Don't pretend you don't." Emily felt the room closing in the weight of a dozen stares pressing against her back. She had been invisible all day. Now suddenly she was the center of gravity. "I know how to do my job," she said simply. The helicopter's roar peaked as it settled onto the roof, the sound so loud it drowned out conversation entirely. The building shook. A few patients cried out in fear. Then, silence. An unnatural, echoing silence. A moment later, boots thundered down the stairwell. The ER doors burst open, and a man in a flight suit strode in, helmet tucked under his arm. He scanned the room with sharp, efficient movements, eyes missing nothing. He locked onto Emily instantly. Relief flickered across his face. "There," he said into the mic clipped to his collar. "I've got eyes on her." Melissa stepped forward, blocking his path. "You can't just barge in here. Who do you think you are?" The man didn't slow. "I think," he said, calmly, stepping around her, "that you're in the wrong place to ask that question." He stopped in front of Emily, close enough that she could smell jet fuel and rain on him. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. The room froze. He nodded, once decisive. "They've been asking for you." Melissa laughed, high and brittle. "This is ridiculous. She's a new nurse. She started today." The man turned his head slightly, eyes cold now. "Then you should be grateful," he said, "that she did." Emily's phone vibrated again. This time she looked. One line. "It's time." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, heart steady, pulse measured. Outside, the helicopter idled, waiting. And for the first time since she'd walked into Riverside Mercy, Emily Carter understood, without doubt, that nothing in this ER would ever be the same. The ER did not erupt into chaos. It compressed. That was the best way to describe it. The way sound narrowed. The way people stopped moving freely and instead orbited a single point. Every conversation thinned to a whisper or died altogether. Even the monitors seemed to soften their beeping, as if the room itself sensed something larger had entered. The flight medic turned slightly thumb, pressing the mic at his collar. "She's confirmed," he said. "Visual contact, standing by." A pause answered him. Not dead air, listening air. Then faint but unmistakable through the open channel came the same voice from before. "Copy that. Just 2 words. Controlled. Final." Emily stood still, shoulders squared, eyes level. Inside, her thoughts moved fast but clean. No panic, no second-guessing, just sequence. Melissa Grant found her voice again. "This is inappropriate," she snapped, stepping forward. "You cannot pull one of my nurses in the middle of your nurse," the flight medic repeated mildly. He finally looked directly at Melissa, really looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not anger, not contempt. Assessment. "No one is pulling anyone," he said. "We're requesting cooperation." Whitmore cleared his throat. "Request or not, this is a hospital. We have protocols." The medic nodded once. "So do we." Another voice cut in closer, now sharper. "Riverside Mercy, this is inbound command. We're on a tight clock." The radio sat on the counter between them, suddenly the most powerful object in the room. "What's the status?" the voice asked. The medic didn't hesitate. "She's on site." A beat. Condition. The question wasn't about Emily's health. Everyone in the room felt that. Emily answered before anyone else could. "Stable," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "But I'm currently assigned to patient care." Silence followed. Then approval. "Understood," the radio voice replied. How long? Emily glanced toward Trauma Bay 3, where alarms were beginning to escalate again. A nurse waved frantically, trying to get Melissa's attention. 5 minutes, Emily said. 10 if things go bad. Another pause. "We'll wait," the voice said. But not longer. Whitmore stared at Emily like he was seeing her for the first time and realizing how badly he'd misjudged the situation. Melissa's face had gone pale beneath her flush. "This is insane," she muttered. "Who are you?" Emily didn't answer. She turned and walked back into the ER, not toward the exit, toward the patients. The room parted for her without anyone consciously deciding to move. She slid into Trauma Bay 3, where a teenage boy lay gasping blood soaking through his shirt. His mother hovered nearby, sobbing, restrained only by a trembling orderly. Emily took control instantly. "Pressure's dropping," she said. "We need suction now." She guided hands, repositioned equipment, spoke to the boy directly, her voice calm and anchored. "Stay with me," she told him. "Look at me. Breathe when I tell you." The mother watched her, desperate, clinging to every word. Outside the bay, Dr. Hale observed the transformation with a tightening chest. Emily wasn't just competent, she was commanding. Not loud, not aggressive, but absolute. This was someone used to being listened to. Melissa hovered uselessly, anger curdling into something closer to fear. She glanced back toward the medic, who stood patiently near the door's helmet under his arm, eyes never leaving Emily. Her badge caught the light as she leaned over the patient, the silver pin glinting sharply. The boy stabilized. Barely, but enough. Emily straightened, stripping off her gloves. "I'm done here," she said to Dr. Hale. "Watch his airway for the next 15. He nodded without hesitation. "Go." The word landed heavier than he realized. Emily stepped out of the bay. The flight medic moved immediately, falling into step beside her, not ahead, not behind. "Rooftop?" he asked. "Yes," Emily replied. Melissa blocked their path again. "No," she said. Her voice cracked. "No. You don't just walk out. You answer questions first." Emily stopped. The ER held its breath. She turned, slowly meeting Melissa's eyes. "You laughed at my badge," Emily said quietly. "You questioned my place here. You tried to keep me out of rooms where people were dying." Melissa opened her mouth. Emily didn't raise her voice. "But none of that matters right now," she continued. "Because someone upstairs needs help. and I'm not going to be late." The words weren't angry. They were final. The medic spoke into his mic again. "She's en route." A door slammed open down the hall. Security officers appeared tense, but unsure whom they were meant to stop or protect. Whitmore lifted a hand weakly. "Let them through." The officers stepped aside. Emily moved toward the elevators, the medic at her side. As they waited, the helicopter's engine surged slightly above them, impatient. "You okay?" the medic asked under his breath. Emily nodded. "I am." The elevator doors opened. As they stepped inside, Melissa watched them go, her world tilting off its axis. Around her, staff avoided her eyes. No one laughed now. The elevator began to rise. Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar shift inside her, the transition from civilian calm to operational focus. "What's the situation?" she asked. The medic glanced at her, something like respect etched into his features. "High-ranking Marine," he said. "Severe injuries. Remote location. We lost 2 on extraction." Emily closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again. "I'll do what I can," she said. "That's what they said you'd say." The elevator dinged. The doors slid open to the roof. Wind slammed into them, fierce and relentless. Floodlights cut through the rain. The helicopter loomed like a living thing, rotors slicing the night. Figures moved with precision around it, uniforms, headsets, weapons slung low. As Emily stepped out onto the helipad, the radio crackled one more time. "Emily Carter," the voice said, no longer distant. "We've been looking for you." She lifted her chin into the wind. "I'm here," she replied, and somewhere deep inside Riverside Mercy, the laughter finally died. The wind on the helipad was merciless. It tore at Emily's scrubs, whipped loose strands of hair across her face, and pressed against her body with enough force to demand balance and intention in every step. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, a physical weight that vibrated through bone and breath alike. She didn't flinch. Across the pad, a cluster of uniformed figures turned as one when they saw her. Their movements were sharp, economical, no wasted gestures, no confusion about who belonged where. One of them stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, rain streaking down the brim of his cap. "Ma'am," he said, voice raised only enough to cut through the noise. "Thank you for coming up." Emily nodded once. "Status." The word slipped out, automatically unadorned. The man blinked, just a flicker of surprise, then gestured toward the helicopter's open side door. "Patient is a Marine general," he said. "Multiple internal injuries, compromised airway, unstable vitals. We're outside the golden window." Emily moved toward the aircraft without another word. Inside the helicopter, the world narrowed. The roar softened into a contained fury, the cabin lights harsh and clinical. A man lay strapped to a stretcher chest, rising unevenly beneath blood-soaked dressings. His face was pale, lined with pain, even in semi-consciousness. Tubes and wires crowded his body, each one a fragile promise holding him to the present. Emily took it all in seconds. "Pressure?" she asked. "Dropping the flight," medic replied. "We've done everything we can in the field." Emily leaned in, eyes sharp, hands already moving. She adjusted a line, checked the airway, listened, really listened to the sounds his body was making. "He needs a surgical intervention we can't do here," she said. "But we can buy him time." The medic hesitated. "That procedure, it's not standard civilian protocol." Emily glanced up at him. "It is for me." Something in her tone erased the doubt. Outside the helicopter on the helipad's edge, Administrator Whitmore stood uselessly, his suit plastered to him by rain and rotor wash. He watched through the open door as Emily worked with focused intensity, issuing calm directives that soldiers twice her size followed without question. This wasn't improvisation. This was muscle memory. Below them, back in the ER, the atmosphere had shifted again, but this time the tension was inward. Melissa Grant paced near the nurse's station, fingers digging into her palms. The room no longer bent around her. Conversations resumed without her input. Orders were given and ignored by people who moments earlier would have snapped to attention. She caught fragments of whispers. "Did you see how they looked at her? That wasn't normal. That badge, maybe it actually means something." Melissa's chest tightened. She spun toward a junior nurse. "Where's Dr. Hale?" she demanded. "In Bay 2, the nurse replied, barely looking at her. Melissa marched off heels, clicking too loudly, too sharply. Dr. Hale stood at a bedside, reviewing vitals when she approached. "This is out of control," she hissed. "We're being undermined." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time that night didn't soften his expression. "No," he said quietly. "We're being exposed." She recoiled as if struck. "You should have backed me," she said. "I should have backed the patients," he replied, "and the people who actually help them." Up on the roof, Emily's hands moved with precision born of repetition and consequence. She spoke steadily to the injured man, grounding him even as he drifted in and out of awareness. "You're not done yet," she told him. "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered unfocused, but he squeezed her hand faintly, instinctively. The procedure was delicate, risky. One mistake would end him. Emily didn't rush. She finished, stepped back and nodded to the medic. "That's all I can do here," she said. "He needs an oar in under 15 minutes. The man exhaled in relief. "We can make that." A new voice cut through the headset channel, close, now authoritative. "Emily." She turned. A senior officer stood a few feet away, rain darkening his uniform insignia gleaming beneath the floodlights. His eyes were sharp, assessing, and unmistakably familiar. "Sir," Emily said, straightening. He studied her for a long moment. "They told me you might be here," he said. "I didn't believe it until I heard your name over the radio." Emily met his gaze. "I didn't think it would come to this." "Neither did we," he replied. "But when it did, there was only one question. She already knew it." He said it anyway. "Where is she?" The words echoed the radio call, but now they carried something else, respect and something like relief. "You did good work down there," he continued. "And up here." Emily nodded. Praise wasn't why she was here. "Sir," she said carefully, "I need to go back inside. My shift isn't over." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "You realize," he said slowly, "we could pull you in permanently. Tonight." She did realize. She had known that risk the moment she stepped onto the helipad. "Not tonight," she replied. "There are people downstairs who still need me." The officer held her gaze, then gave a small, approving nod. "That hasn't changed," he said. "Not about you." The helicopter doors closed. As it lifted off, the rotors thundered again, tearing into the sky. Emily watched until the lights disappeared into the storm. Then she turned back toward the stairwell. Inside, the hospital alarms rang. Voices rose. The night pressed on. Emily descended alone. When the elevator doors opened back onto the ER floor, conversation died instantly. All eyes turned. Melissa Grant stood frozen near the nurse's station, face drained of color. Emily stepped out, wet, wind-blown, composed. She walked past Melissa without a word. Past Whitmore. Past the whispers. Back into the heart of the ER, where a patient cried out and a monitor screamed for attention. Emily snapped on fresh gloves. "I'm back," she said calmly. "What did I miss?" And in that moment, the balance of power at Riverside Mercy shifted quietly, irrevocably. The ER did not erupt when Emily returned. It recalibrated. There was no applause, no whispered congratulations, just a subtle, unmistakable shift in gravity, as if the room itself had quietly decided who mattered now. People moved differently around her, gurneys angled to give her space. Questions came to her first, not last. Melissa Grant felt it immediately. She stood rigid at the nurse's station, arms crossed so tightly her shoulders trembled. Authority had always been her armor, years of seniority, sharp orders, a reputation for being untouchable. But armor only worked when people believed in it. Right now, no one did. Emily moved back into Trauma Bay 2, where an elderly man's oxygen levels were slipping. She assessed him quickly, adjusted his mask, murmured reassurance. Her voice carried just far enough to be heard, but not to draw attention. Dr. Hale watched her work, a knot tightening behind his sternum. This wasn't just skill. This was command without ego. He stepped closer. "How bad is it out there?" he asked quietly. Emily didn't look up. Bad enough that waiting would have killed him. That was all she said. Hale nodded. He didn't need more. Across the room, Whitmore paced near the glass wall that separated administration offices from the ER floor. His phone buzzed constantly, now calls, he answered with forced professionalism, his polished tone cracking just slightly at the edges. "Yes, sir. I understand. Of course we're cooperating." He hung up and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, rain and sweat blurring together. An investigation was coming, and there would be nowhere to hide. Melissa rounded on him the moment he stepped back onto the floor. "You let this happen," she hissed. "You let them walk all over us." Whitmore's eyes flicked toward Emily, then away. "Lower your voice." "No," Melissa snapped. "She humiliated me. In front of everyone." Whitmore leaned closer, his voice sharp and low. You did that yourself." The words landed like a slap. Melissa recoiled. "Excuse me." "She didn't raise her voice," Whitmore said. "She didn't break protocol. She saved lives on our floor and on our roof. And now people are asking questions." "About her," Melissa demanded. "About us," he corrected. "About how someone like that could be treated the way she was." Melissa's chest heaved. "She's a nobody. A new nurse with a fake badge." Whitmore's gaze hardened. "I wouldn't be so sure." As if summoned by the words, a pair of uniformed officers entered the ER, this time not in flight suits but dark jackets with discreet insignia. They moved with quiet authority, scanning, listening. One approached the nurse's station. "Charge Nurse Grant?" he asked. Melissa straightened reflexively. "Yes, we'd like to speak with you," he said, privately. Her mouth opened, closed. "Now?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. The ER watched as Melissa was escorted away, her heels clicking too fast, too loud. Conversations resumed in hushed tones the moment she disappeared down the corridor. Emily felt it not satisfaction, not relief, but a familiar, heavy sense of inevitability. Consequences always arrived eventually. She finished stabilizing her patient and stepped out into the corridor. A young nurse hovered nearby, eyes wide. "Emily," she said hesitantly. I'm sorry. For earlier." Emily studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Learn from it." That was all. The night wore on relentless. Ambulances came and went. A cardiac arrest was pulled back from the edge. A gunshot victim didn't make it. Emily moved through it all with the same steady presence, absorbing grief without letting it fracture her. Near midnight, the ER finally slowed. "Doctor." Hale found Emily near the supply room, rechecking inventory as if the night hadn't just bent around her. "You didn't have to come back," he said. Emily glanced at him. "Yes, I did." He hesitated. "They're saying, whoever you worked with before, they want you back." "I know." And Emily closed the cabinet carefully. "This place needs work." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You know, you shook things up. That wasn't my goal. But it happened anyway." Emily met his gaze. "Then don't waste it." Down the hall, the interrogation room buzzed with quiet tension. Melissa sat stiffly in a chair, arms folded, eyes blazing with a mix of fury and fear. Across from her, the officer laid out printed reports, timestamps, video stills, witness statements. "You interfered with patient care," he said calmly. Repeatedly. "That's not true," Melissa shot back. "I was managing staff. You reassigned a qualified nurse away from critical care during a mass casualty event. She's new. She identified a medication error that saved a patient's life," he replied. "You dismissed it." Melissa faltered. Another page slid forward. "You publicly mocked her credentials," he continued, "and attempted to bar her from assisting during a federal medical emergency." Silence filled the room. "We'll be recommending immediate suspension pending review," the officer said, "and a full audit of ER leadership practices." Melissa's mask cracked. "You don't understand," she whispered. "She made me look weak." The officer leaned back slightly. "No," he said. "You did." Back on the floor, Whitmore stood alone near the windows, staring out into the rain-soaked night where the helicopter had vanished hours earlier. He knew his own reckoning was coming. Emily passed him without breaking stride. "Miss Carter," he called softly. She stopped, turned. "You should know," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The board will want to meet you." Emily considered that. "About what? About leadership?" Whitmore replied. "About culture. About what happened here." Emily nodded once. "Then, I'll tell them the truth." Whitmore swallowed. She walked away. As the clock crept toward dawn, Riverside Mercy felt different. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner, as if something toxic had finally been exposed to air. Emily stood at the nurse's station, finishing her charting. Her badge caught the light again, no longer a joke, no longer invisible. A symbol, not of rank, of responsibility. And somewhere far above the hospital, long past the reach of laughter or doubt, a radio channel went silent, its question answered. Dawn crept in reluctantly, a thin grey light bleeding through the high windows of Riverside Mercy's ER. The night had not ended so much as loosened its grip, leaving behind exhaustion and a residue of things unsaid. Emily Carter felt it in her bones. She stood near the charting station, finishing notes with the same care she'd used all night. Every word mattered, every timestamp. Accuracy was a form of respect for patience, for truth. Around her, the ER moved in low gear. Coffee cups appeared. Voices softened. People spoke her name now when they needed something. Emily, can you check this, Emily? Does this look right to you, Emily? What do you think? She answered each question without changing her tone. Respect earned too quickly was dangerous. She knew that. It could curdle into resentment if mishandled. Dr. Hale approached her just after 630A, rubbing tired eyes. "They're here," he said. She didn't ask who. 2 members of the hospital board stood near the glass-walled conference room, flanked by a legal representative and a uniformed liaison whose posture screamed military even without insignia. Whitmore hovered nearby, pale and rigid, his authority now purely ceremonial. Emily finished her sentence, signed off the chart, and capped the pen. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. Inside the conference room, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Chairs scraped softly as people shifted. The board chair, a woman in her 60s with iron-grey hair and a reputation for dismantling egos, gestured for Emily to sit. "Miss Carter," she said, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us." Emily sat folding her hands neatly on the table. "Of course." The liaison studied her closely. "You understand why this meeting is happening?" "Yes," Emily replied. "Because something failed here." A flicker of surprise crossed the board chair's face. "Go on," she said. Emily didn't hesitate. "This hospital has a culture problem," she said evenly. "Not because people don't care, but because hierarchy has been mistaken for competence. That creates fear, and fear kills patients." Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. The legal representative cleared his throat. "That's a serious allegation." "So is interference with patient care," Emily replied, her gaze steady. "So is bullying. So is ignoring valid concerns because they come from the wrong person." The board chair leaned back, appraising her. "And your role in last night, I did my job," Emily said. "Both times." The liaison finally spoke. "You could have stayed on that roof," he said quietly. "You were authorized, encouraged." Emily met his eyes. "And people downstairs needed help." Silence followed. Then the board chair nodded slowly. "We've reviewed the footage," she said, "and the reports. Effective immediately, charge nurse Grant is suspended pending termination. Administrator Whitmore will be placed on leave while we conduct a full leadership audit." Whitmore's face drained of color. Emily absorbed the news without visible reaction. "There's more," the chair continued. "We want you to take an advisory role. Temporary. Help us rebuild this department." Emily inhaled, once measured. "I'll help," she said, "but I won't be your shield. This can't be cosmetic." The chair smiled faintly. "We wouldn't insult you by asking." The meeting ended quietly. Emily returned to the ER floor, the sun now fully risen. The shift change buzzed around her new staff, arriving old staff dragging themselves toward rest. A few nurses approached her hesitantly. We heard one said, "About Melissa." Emily nodded. "Focus on the patients." Another swallowed. "About you." Emily's gaze softened slightly. "I'm still a nurse." That seemed to settle something. Later that morning, as the ER stabilized into routine, Emily stepped outside into the cool air. The storm had passed, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. Somewhere far off, traffic hummed back to life. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered. Emily came the familiar voice. Calm, controlled. "We're debriefing in 12 hours. "I won't be there," she said. A pause. "You're declining, I'm choosing," she replied. Another pause, this one longer. Then, understood. The call ended. Emily stood for a moment longer, breathing in the quiet. The helicopter was gone. The urgency for now had faded, but the work here was just beginning. Inside, a new nurse struggled with an IV, hands shaking. A senior nurse sighed impatiently. Emily stepped in gently. "Here," she said. "Let me show you a trick." The young nurse watched relief flooding her face as the lines slid in cleanly. "Thank you," she whispered. Emily smiled, small, genuine. That was the badge she wore now. Not the pin, not the history, the choice. By noon, Riverside Mercy had the uneasy calm of a place that knew it was being watched. Not the frantic alertness of an emergency, this was subtler. Conversations lowered when administrators passed. Doors closed more carefully. People checked themselves before speaking, before dismissing, before laughing. Emily Carter noticed all of it. She finished a late chart review and headed back onto the floor just as an overhead announcement called for a trauma consult. Bay 1, Motorcyclist versus guardrail. Severe injuries. She moved without being assigned. No one stopped her. Inside the bay, the patient thrashed weakly, helmet still clutched in one gloved hand, as if he'd never quite let go. Blood pooled beneath the gurney. The smell of gasoline lingered. Emily took the lead without theatrics, steady voice, clear directives. A respiratory therapist followed her cues instinctively. A resident deferred without resentment. Dr. Hale stood back for a moment, watching the choreography unfold. This was what a healthy hierarchy looked like, he realized. Not silence, not fear, trust. They stabilized the patient just enough to get imaging. As the gurney rolled out, Hale leaned closer. "You're changing things," he said quietly. Emily stripped off her gloves. "I'm just not letting them go back." The words stayed with him. Mid-afternoon brought the inevitable media. A local news van idled outside the hospital entrance. Phones buzzed with notifications. Someone had leaked the helicopter footage. The angles were grainy, but the implication was unmistakable. A military aircraft, a civilian hospital, a nurse at the center. Whitmore, now officially sidelined, attempted damage control from a borrowed office, issuing statements that said nothing and meant less. The board chair took over communications, firm and unapologetic. "We are addressing internal failures," she said on camera, "and we are committed to change." Inside, the ER staff avoided the windows. Emily avoided the cameras. She retreated to the break room for the first time that day, sinking onto a plastic chair, shoulders finally heavy. The adrenaline had long burned off, leaving behind the ache that always came after. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was somewhere else, another night, another storm, another triage under floodlights that didn't forgive mistakes. The memory pressed close, sharp and unwelcome. A knock on the door pulled her back. Dr. Hale stepped in, holding 2 paper cups. He offered one without comment. "Coffee," he said. "Strong." Emily accepted it. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a beat. "You didn't have to stay," he said finally. "I know. You could have disappeared after the roof." Emily stared into the cup. "That's not who I am anymore." Hale nodded. "They're calling you a hero." She winced. "That's a word people use when they don't want to ask harder questions." "Like what?" "Like why it took a helicopter to make them listen." The door opened again. This time the uniformed liaison stepped in, no entourage, no camera-ready posture. Just the same quiet authority as before. "Emily," he said. "May we talk?" She rose, motioning for him to follow her into the hall. They stopped near a window overlooking the ambulance bay, now calm. "You turned down reactivation," he said. "Yes, that wasn't an easy call." She met his eyes. Neither was leaving in the first place. He studied her, then nodded. "The general survived. He asked about you." Emily exhaled slowly. "I'm glad." He said one word, the liaison added. She waited. "Reliable." It landed heavier than praise. "Listen," he continued. "What you did last night and what you're doing now, it matters. But there will be pressure. From us. From them. From people who want your story without your standards. I'm aware. You're choosing the harder road." Emily looked back toward the ER, where a nurse laughed softly at something a patient said, where someone else wiped down a bed with care. "I always have," she replied. The liaison extended a hand. She shook it firm and brief. "Door stays open," he said. She nodded. "So does this one." He left. The rest of the day unfolded without spectacle. Patients came, patients left. Life asserted itself in its stubborn, unglamorous way. Late afternoon, a junior nurse approached Emily, eyes anxious. "They want me to float to trauma," she said. I've never. Emily placed a hand lightly on her arm. "You won't be alone." Together they walked into Bay 2. As evening approached, the ER settled into a new rhythm, still chaotic, still demanding but different. When someone spoke up, they were heard. When a concern was raised, it was checked. Change didn't announce itself. It showed up quietly in choices. At the end of her shift, Emily removed her badge and set it carefully in her locker. The silver pin caught the light one last time. She hesitated. Then she left it there. Walking out of Riverside Mercy, the sky burned orange and gold, the storm long gone. No helicopters, no sirens. Just a hospital standing on the edge of becoming something better. Emily took a breath and headed home. Tomorrow she'd be back. The changes didn't arrive with banners or speeches. They arrived in emails sent just before midnight, in revised schedules posted quietly at dawn, in policies rewritten with language that left less room for ego and more for accountability. Riverside Mercy didn't announce a new era. It slipped into one. Emily Carter felt it the moment she stepped back onto the floor 2 days later. Her name was already on the trauma rotation board. Not highlighted, not elevated, just placed, where it made sense. A few nurses glanced up when she walked in, then returned to their work. No whispers, no smirks. A nod here, a simple morning there. It was the kind of respect that didn't demand attention. That mattered more than applause. Dr. Hale met her near Bay 1, tablet tucked under his arm. He looked tired but lighter. They approved the changes, he said. Mandatory leadership training, peer review escalation, anonymous reporting that actually goes somewhere. Emily nodded. Good. And he added, lowering his voice, they want you to co-lead trauma simulations next month. She considered that. With who? With whoever shows up willing to learn, he said. She allowed herself a small smile. The first trauma of the day came in hard and fast. Construction accident, a fall from 30 feet. The patient was unconscious, breathing shallow pupils, uneven. Emily took her place at the bedside, issuing calm, precise instructions. The team responded smoothly, almost instinctively. When a resident hesitated, she guided, not corrected. Here, she said quietly. Watch the angle. The line went in. The patient stabilized. Afterward, as the gurney rolled out, the resident lingered. Thank you, he said, for not making me feel stupid. Emily met his eyes. Mistakes happen in silence, she replied. Learning shouldn't. Word spread not about the helicopter, not about the general, but about that moment. About how the ER felt safer now. Less sharp around the edges. Still, not everyone was at peace. Melissa Grant sat at home scrolling through news articles that never named her but described her perfectly. Former charge nurse. Under investigation. Administrative failures. Her phone buzzed constantly, some messages supportive, others not at all. She replayed the night over and over, searching for the moment everything turned. The laugh. The order. The way she'd tried to block Emily at the doors. She'd thought authority was something you defended. She'd been wrong. Back at the hospital, Administrator Whitmore returned briefly to clear out his office. He avoided the ER floor, taking side corridors, keeping his eyes down. When he passed Emily near the elevators, he stopped. Miss Carter, he said. She turned. I owe you an apology, he continued, stiff and formal, for failing to intervene, for prioritizing image over safety. Emily studied him for a long moment. Apologies don't fix systems, she said. Actions do. He nodded, chastened. I hope whoever comes after me understands that. She didn't respond. Later that afternoon, the board chair arrived, unannounced, walking the floor with no entourage. She observed quietly, asked pointed questions, listened more than she spoke. When she reached Emily, she stopped. I wanted to see it for myself, she said. The difference. Emily gestured around them. This is what happens when people feel safe speaking up. The chair smiled faintly. We're formalizing your advisory role. Emily shook her head. Temporary. For now, the chair agreed. But leadership has a way of finding people who don't want it. Emily glanced toward Bay 3, where a nurse comforted a grieving father, voice low and steady. If that happens, she said, I'll do it my way. The chair nodded. That's the only way worth doing. That evening, a small incident tested everything. A junior nurse flagged a discrepancy in medication orders, something that a week ago would have been dismissed. The attending paused, rechecked, caught the error. A patient was spared. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They corrected it and moved on. Emily watched from across the room, chest tight with something like relief. Change, she knew, wasn't dramatic. It was cumulative. As her shift ended, she found her locker open. Inside, her badge lay where she'd left it. The silver pin gleamed softly. She clipped it back on, not because it meant something to others, because it reminded her what she owed to patients, to colleagues, to the version of herself that had once walked away rather than compromise. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. No helicopters cut the sky. No radios crackled with urgency. Just the steady pulse of a hospital doing its work. Emily walked to her car, tired but grounded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, new tests of the system they were building. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar and welcome settle in her chest. Hope. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not by courier, not stamped with seals or threats, just a plain white envelope waiting in Emily Carter's locker when she clocked in for the evening shift. No return address. Her name typed, not handwritten. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Request for voluntary statement, Federal Review Committee. Emily exhaled slowly. She had known this was coming. The events of that night, the helicopter, the Marine General, the internal failures had triggered a wider net. When something broke that loudly, oversight followed. Not vengeance, not praise. Scrutiny. She folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. Outside the locker room, the ER buzzed with the familiar chaos of a midweek evening. Sirens wailed in the distance. A trauma alert echoed over the intercom. Life didn't wait for investigations. Emily walked onto the floor and went straight to Bay 4, where a middle-aged woman lay clutching her abdomen, pain etched deep into her face. Emily assessed quickly, gently, efficiently. On a scale of 1 to 10, she asked. 8, the woman whispered. Emily nodded. We'll get that down. As she worked, she felt eyes on her, not invasive, not suspicious, curious, measuring. This time it didn't weigh on her. Dr. Hale approached between cases, glancing at the envelope now tucked into Emily's pocket. You going to answer it? He asked. Yes, Emily said. When after my shift. He nodded. They'll ask hard questions. I hope so, she replied. Easy ones don't change anything. That night the ER tested itself again. A drunk driver collision. 2 victims, 1 critical. The attending hesitated over triage priority, old instincts tugging toward protocol over reality. A junior nurse spoke up, voice tight but clear. The second patient's pressure is dropping faster. The room stilled. A week ago, that voice might have been ignored. Now the attending recalculated. You're right. Switch. They moved. The patient lived. Emily watched it happen, a quiet ache blooming behind her sternum. This was the work. Near midnight, a familiar presence returned. The uniformed liaison stepped onto the floor, this time without urgency, without the sharp edges of crisis. He waited near the nurse's station until Emily noticed him. Can I steal a minute? He asked. She nodded, stepping aside. They're convening tomorrow morning, he said. The committee. They want context, not just facts. Emily folded her arms loosely. And you, I'm here to make sure they listen. She studied him. You don't owe me that. He shook his head. We owe the truth. They stood in silence for a beat, the ER humming around them. You staying? He asked finally. At Riverside Mercy, Emily replied. Yes. She glanced toward Bay 2, where the junior nurse from earlier now moved with more confidence, where laughter, quiet, respectful, broke through the tension. Yes, Emily said. I am. He nodded once. Then this place is lucky. He left without ceremony. After her shift, Emily sat alone in her car engine off the envelope, resting on the passenger seat. Rain tapped lightly against the windshield, a softer echo of the storm that had started everything. She opened the letter again, rereading the request. Then she began to speak not aloud, but inside herself, organizing the truth the way she always did, clearly, without decoration. She would tell them about the medication error caught because someone listened, about the patient stabilized because rank didn't silence competence, about the culture that nearly killed people because laughter mattered more than care. And she would tell them why she came back from the roof. Not because she was ordered to, not because she was needed elsewhere, because leaving would have been easier. The committee meeting the next morning was quiet, antiseptic, stripped of drama. Men and women in suits and uniforms sat across from her faces, neutral pens ready. Emily answered every question. She didn't embellish. She didn't protect anyone who didn't deserve it. She didn't ask for recognition. When it was over, the chair leaned back and studied her. You understand, he said, that your testimony will lead to consequences. Yes, Emily replied. That's the point. He nodded slowly. You could have avoided all of this. She met his gaze. So could they. Back at Riverside, Mercy word traveled quickly but quietly. Melissa Grant's suspension became termination. Whitmore's leave became resignation. Policies became practice. And Emily returned to the ER floor where the real verdict was being rendered every hour. A patient reached for her hand in fear. A nurse asked for guidance without shame. A doctor listened. Late that evening, as she finished her charting, Emily felt the weight finally ease, not vanish, but settle into something manageable. Dr. Hale passed by, pausing. "You did something rare," he said. "What's that? You stayed," he replied. "When leaving would have made you a legend." Emily looked around the ER at the people, the noise, the work. "I don't need to be a legend," she said softly. "I need this place to be better." Outside, the night stretched calm and unbroken. No helicopters, no radios calling her name, just the steady rhythm of care finally aligned with respect. And for Emily Carter, that was enough. The night Riverside Mercy truly changed. No one noticed it happening. There was no announcement, no ribbon cut, no ceremony where names were read aloud and applause filled the room. The ER simply breathed differently, like lungs finally clearing after years of shallow air. Emily Carter felt it midway through a late shift, standing at the nurse's station with a tablet in hand, reviewing labs for a patient who shouldn't have been stable, but somehow was. "Emily," a voice called. She looked up. It was a new nurse, first month in the ER. Young, nervous. The same look Emily had worn once, long before this hospital. "I think something's off with this order," the nurse said, voice low. "But I'm not sure." Emily didn't take the tablet right away. She asked, "What do you think is off?" The nurse hesitated, then pointed. "The dosage. It doesn't match the patient's weight." Emily smiled. Not wide, not proud. "Just enough." "You're right," she said. "Let's confirm it." They corrected the order together. No raised voices, no humiliation, no fear. The patient slept peacefully an hour later. Across the room, Dr. Hale noticed the exchange and turned back to his work without comment. That more than anything told Emily the change was real. Later that night, she passed the empty charge nurse's office. The nameplate had been removed. The door stood open, lights off. Just a room now, no throne, no shadow. Whitmore's office was already cleared out. Someone else would sit there soon. Someone who hopefully understood that leadership wasn't about being obeyed, it was about being trusted. Near midnight, the familiar sound of rotor blades echoed faintly in the distance. Not close, not urgent, just a helicopter passing far above the city. Several nurses froze instinctively. Emily didn't. She continued, charting, pen steady, heart calm. Whatever that sound had meant before, it no longer owned her. Her phone buzzed. One message. "Unknown number," they asked again. "Final offer. Full reinstatement. Command position." Emily stared at the screen. Once that message would have torn her in half. Once it would have felt like unfinished business calling her back into the dark. She typed a reply slowly. "Emily, I'm exactly where I need to be." She locked the phone and slipped it away. At 2:17 a.m., a patient coded. The room snapped into motion, fast, clean, focused. Emily moved with the team voice, steady, hands precise. No one hesitated. No one tried to dominate. They worked like parts of the same machine. The patient came back. A breath, a pulse, a second chance. Afterward, as the room reset, a paramedic leaned against the wall, exhausted. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "this place used to scare me." Emily glanced at him. "Why? Because people were too busy protecting themselves," he said. "Now, it feels different." She nodded. "That's the goal." As dawn approached, pale light crept through the windows again, soft and forgiving. Emily finished her shift quietly, signed out, and returned to the locker room. She unclipped her badge. The silver pin caught the light just as it always had. Once it had marked her as an outsider, then as a mystery, then as a threat to the wrong people. Now it was simply hers. She placed it in her locker and closed the door. Outside, the hospital exhaled, ambulances idling, staff changing shifts, the city waking up unaware of the invisible war that had ended inside those walls. Emily stepped into the morning air and paused. She thought of the laughter that had once followed her down the hallway, of the radio call that had frozen the room, of the question that changed everything. Where is she? The answer had never really been about location. She had been there all along, doing the work, holding the line, refusing to be smaller than the moment demanded. Emily walked to her car as the sun rose fully over Riverside Mercy. No spotlight followed her. No legend was carved. Just something far rarer. A system corrected. Lives protected. Silence replaced by respect. And a nurse once laughed at, once underestimated, who stayed. Some people mistake volume for authority and titles for worth. They believe power lives in who speaks the loudest, who stands highest, who is obeyed without question. But real power is quieter. It's the nurse who speaks up when something feels wrong, the professional who chooses patience over pride, the person who stays when walking away would be easier and safer. Emily Carter was never waiting to be discovered. She was waiting for the moment when integrity mattered more than ego. And when that moment came, she didn't demand recognition. She demanded change. If this story moved you, take a second and comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe quiet courage deserves a voice, subscribe and stay with us for the next story.